"Oh God, the sea is raging again," the old woman shouted into the pitch-black night as the waves rose straight up like hands trying to strangle the village. People fled, children cried, but Tim still stood on the rocky outcrop, the flute in his hand trembling. He knew why the storm had come. The wave harmony ritual, the ancient rite that the villagers had forgotten, tarnished by a greedy man. But deep beneath the water, the golden-scaled mermaid was singing without a sound, begging her mother to spare the humans. Both owed the sea, one for love, the other for forgetfulness. And tonight, the sea would ask them, "Have you kept your promise?" Long ago, in an old African-American community on the edge of a southern swamp, there was a small village that lived by fishing nets and songs handed down from the days of slavery. The smell of salt, mixed with the scent of young mud, the sound of wings tilting over the water, everything felt like the lingering breath of ancestors. The sea there was not just a place to make a living, it was living memory, a silent god that recorded every human breath. The elders said, "The sea remembers everything, both the promises and the forgetting." In that village lived a young man named Tim, thin-framed, with deep, calm eyes like someone used to staring down storms without fear. Every evening, as the sun slid toward the horizon, he carried his old bamboo flute to the rocky outcrop where the wind howled and the waves crashed, sitting alone to play the tune his grandfather had passed down. The sound was light as breath, yet it touched something deep in the water. The villagers were as used to the flute as they were to the taste of salt. They told one another, "Tim is the boy who plays music for the ocean." No one knew when Tim's flute had become the familiar heartbeat of sunset, the melody sometimes sorrowful like the tide pulling back, sometimes joyful like waves slapping white sand. Day after day, Tim sent his longing for his lost parents out to the open sea, and the sea, in its own way, returned a whispering echo from the depths. Where the light faded and schools of glowing fish twisted around coral reefs, a pair of eyes opened wide to listen. That was Helen the mermaid, with honey-dark skin and golden scales that blazed like a dawn trapped underwater. When she swam, the scales on her body reflected a shimmering light that woke the entire seafloor. She was the youngest daughter of the deep-sea queen, the one who held the memory of every wave. But Helen was different from her sisters. While they praised power and riches, she was enchanted by the stories drifting down from the surface, human stories. When the moon rose, Helen often swam close to the surface, listening to laughter, singing, and the rhythm of fishermen's oars. She heard mothers singing lullabies on the shore, children playing in the sand, men mending nets and telling old tales. In her eyes, the human world was imperfect, but alive and real in a way that tightened her heart. She longed for warmth, longed to walk among those people, even if only once. And then, on a crimson evening as the sunlight melted across the water, Helen heard a sound entirely different. It was not the waves or the birds, but Tim's flute. The tone was clear and deep, like a dewdrop falling straight into her heart. It carried a gentle loneliness she had never felt in the vast ocean. From that night on, she sought out that place every sunset. Tim still sat on the outcrop, eyes closed, playing strange melodies that made the water rise gently like a breath. Helen hid behind the coral, daring only to listen, not to draw near. But the sea cannot keep secrets forever. The sound plunged into the water, shattering into thousands of glittering fragments, and somewhere in the depths, the waves began to change rhythm. Helen softly joined in, her voice rang through the ocean's heart like a streak of golden light slicing the dark. When her song met the flute, the entire sea seemed to sigh. Every creature stopped moving. The coral glowed like 1,000 candles. From then on, every sunset became a sound appointment. Tim played, Helen sang, neither knowing who the other was, only that their hearts beat to the same rhythm. The sea seemed to listen, and the wind became a messenger, carrying the music across the swamp, past every roof, through the salt-soaked dreams of the villagers. Many said that on those nights, the sea grew calm as someone listening to a story. And in that very calm, something had begun, nameless, formless, but stronger than the ocean's song. Helen had never felt a longing like this. Each day she swam closer to the surface, where the evening light made her golden scales flare like fire. She knew she was breaking the law, that her queen mother forbade any child from mingling with humans. But inside her, another voice spoke, not the voice of the sea, but the voice of her heart, saying some things were worth the price. As for Tim, he did not know anyone was listening, yet every time he played, he felt less alone. Something in the music answered him, warm and deep, as if the sea were replying. He began to call the melody the stranger's song. And like every story from the salt lands, where people and sea still trusted each other, the things that could not be seen were often the truest. And before we continue the main story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to know. One different evening, the waves struck harder than usual. Tim looked up and saw a strange light reflecting across the water, not sunlight, but a golden shimmer moving like the sea's own breath. He thought his eyes were playing tricks. But beneath that water, Helen was there, only a few wave beats away, her deep black eyes looking up, and inside her, fear and excitement blended into one. The sea knew. The waves had begun whispering their two names to each other. Beneath the deep blue water where light scattered like breath, Helen swam silently through the flickering coral forest. Each flick of her tail left a golden trail, like the sun's path in a dream. Schools of small fish circled her, curious and reverent, for no mermaid had ever carried such radiant light within. Her scales were inlaid with sunlight, shimmering so brightly they revealed even the hesitation in her heart. She knew that if she surfaced just a little higher, if she crossed the thin veil of water between two worlds, she could see the face of the boy with the strange flute. But inside her, a quiet fear still stirred, the fear of the forbidden, of her mother's stern eyes. The queen of the deep sea was the keeper of water's memory. From her coral throne amid the currents, she could hear every sound echoing in the ocean's heart, from the whisper of sand to the call of waves. For some time, she had sensed something changing. The guiding songs for migrating fish grew interrupted. The tide's rhythm turned unfamiliar. She summoned her daughters and listened to each voice. When Helen's turn came, her tone trembled, breaking like waves against rock. The queen looked deep into her eyes and saw a fire there, a light that did not belong to the sea. In that moment, worry sharpened. Her youngest was turning toward the world above, the world of humans, those who had once spilled blood into the water, who had forgotten their ancestors' promises when they received the sea's gifts. Long ago, the ancestors of the village on the shore had bowed before the ocean. They held the wave harmony ritual, a humble and beautiful rite. Fishermen halted their boats for a week, singing work songs to thank the sea for fish, for rain, for sandy shores. But over time, people began to see the ritual as a burden, an obstacle to profit. The songs were forgotten, the flutes fell silent, and the sea grew quiet. The queen still remembered. Deep within, she still waited for those songs to return, for they were not just gratitude but the bridge between sea and humanity. Now, hearing the human flute sound drift to the seafloor, she knew someone was awakening what had slept too long. Helen did not fully understand that anger. She only felt something shift in her heart each time she heard the flute. The sound made the water around her ripple, like the ocean's own heartbeat. She began leaving the coral palace more often, silently swimming closer to the surface, evading her mother's and sister's eyes. Each time, she saw the sunset melting across the sea, reflecting off her scales into a hazy gold that made the waves mistake it for a lost dawn. Above, Tim still sat, his face still as stone, lips touching the flute while the wind did the rest. Some nights the sea was so calm she could see his shadow cast onto the water, clear down to each strand of hair. She softly hummed a low note, testing how far her song could reach. That tiny sound spread, colliding with the flute and blending into one. Then the sea grew clearer, and the wide-eyed fish looked around, as if witnessing a miracle. Gradually, every night became the same. They found each other in sound. No words, no forms, only rhythm and heartbeat. Helen sensed the water rise to greet him whenever he neared the shore. She heard the waves laugh, but that laughter carried the bitter salt of warning. Each time she returned to the palace, her mother's gaze pierced through the water. The queen asked why her daughter's song grew weak, why the coral's call no longer echoed in her as before. Helen only bowed her head, saying nothing. In her heart, images from the surface flickered, fires in villagers' homes, hands holding nets, sweat-drenched faces still singing. In the ocean, emotion is dangerous. Water remembers every tremor, every lie, every wish. Each time Helen thought of Tim, the water around her glowed brighter, and the entire kingdom could feel it. Her sisters began to whisper that their youngest had been seduced by human song. They recalled the old prophecy. If a daughter of the sea loves a land dweller, the tides will change color. Helen was afraid, but she could not stop. One night, the waves rose unusually high. On the shore, Tim still sat playing his flute, unaware that beneath him the entire ocean was stirring. Helen swam fast, darting past coral rings and through seagrass forests, following the flute's sound like a guiding thread. She stopped, very close to the surface, close enough to see his silhouette against the moon. The wind carried the scent of mud and salt, sprinkling a strange sweetness on her lips. For the first time in her life, she felt the urge to step out of the water, to breathe the air he breathed, even if only once. But at that moment, from the depths came the Queen's voice, low and heavy as a reef. Do not go near the shore. Humans have forgotten. The sea no longer trusts them. The voice shook the entire ocean, and Helen clutched her chest to keep from suffocating. She knew her mother was not wrong. Humans had taken too much and given nothing back, yet something inside her still whispered that not all had forgotten. At least one person still remembered, with a small but sincere flute. As the moon faded, Helen left the surface. In her heart, two worlds collided like opposing waves. One side was her mother's call, duty, the deep sea. The other was the sound of wind, of flute, of the longing to be understood and seen. She knew that once she crossed that boundary, there would be no turning back. But love, though only an echo so far, had already kindled, and the sea, though trying to hide it, was still listening to every heartbeat from its daughter's heart. The sea lay still as if holding its breath, only the slow waves lapping gently against the sandy shore. Helen swam alone through the night, her golden scales casting a faint light like lost candles in the water's heart. She had tried to restrain herself for days, but the more she avoided it, the clearer Tim's flute became, like a thread pulling her heart toward the sun. Unable to bear it any longer, she cut through the black seaweed forest, heading to the forbidden zone where no one in the kingdom dared venture, where the water thickened with ancient vows never fully kept. They called it the Dark Trench. No light could reach the bottom. Fish passing by fell silent, fearing the endless whirlpool of memories and sorrow. Helen paused before the wall of black water, her heart pounding wildly. She knew the boundary exchange law existed there, an ancient pact that only desperate souls sought. No witch with potions, no kind hand ready to help. Only the sea's principles, cold and neutral as the water itself. Helen dove deeper. Darkness thickened around her, the water growing heavy and cold. Each heartbeat dragged along hundreds of ancient echoes, pleas swallowed by the depths, unfinished songs. In that void, a low voice rang out, unclear from where, as if from her own scales. You come to walk on land, but water gives nothing without taking something of equal value. She did not answer, only bowed her head. The voice continued, smooth as waves gliding over stone. Your song is water's identity. Without it, you are no longer a child of the sea. That is the only price. In that moment, Helen felt the tremor in her own blood. Her song, her soul, was what made coral bloom, drew fish near, made the ocean remember her as a single note. But images of Tim, of moonlight on the water, of the flute trembling under his fingers, kept flashing in her mind. She wanted to reach him, to walk on the sand, to see the world he lived in, even if only for a fleeting moment. The sea's voice spoke one last time. Every step you take will be like treading on a blade. If the love you seek is true, the pain will dissolve like salt in water. But if it is only a dream, dawn will reclaim you. Helen nodded. The water around her swirled fiercely, rings coiling around her body, squeezing her breath. She opened her mouth to sing, but no sound emerged. Her throat burned, then emptied. A golden glow poured from her chest, dissolving into thousands of glittering specks drifting into the dark. Golden scales fell from her body, melting and reforming into a hazy mist. The pain tore through her, arching her like a bowstring pulled taut. When the water stilled, she saw her body transformed. The fishtail was gone. In its place were two weak, pale legs trembling amid small waves. Her skin caught the moonlight, still glinting with thin golden traces like remnants of the sea. Helen tried to swim, but her old grace was lost. The water pushed her upward, gentle as a farewell. She rose until waves slapped against her, salt filling her lungs and wind striking her skin. On the shore, dawn was just breaking. Warm light swept across the water, making her body glow like a forgotten jewel. She collapsed on the sand, breath ragged, chest heaving. For the first time she felt the weight of earth, the chill of wind, the scent of dry grass and distant cookfire smoke. Everything was dizzyingly different. In that instant, she felt pitifully small in the world she had once dreamed of. From afar came running footsteps. A young man's startled cry sent gulls scattering into the sky. Tim rushed over, kneeling beside her. The girl lay motionless, hair tangled, skin shimmering with a pale golden hue like morning mist. No words escaped her cracked lips. He called to her, but only the waves answered. Tim draped a cloth over her, lifting her from the cold sand. In his arms, Helen heard the familiar heartbeat, the sound she had known only through water. He carried her home, laying her on the old bed by the window. Morning light streamed in, revealing scratches on her legs where sand still clung to tiny drops of blood. Helen looked out, watching the sea recede, leaving trails of white foam smooth as milk. Her heart ached. She had left the place she belonged, traded her most precious gift to be here. She could not speak, could not sing, only breathe the labored breath of a creature learning to be human. When night fell, Tim sat by the window, lamplight tracing the quiet lines of his face. Helen watched him, wanting to say she recognized the flute in his heart, that its melody had saved her soul from the ocean's loneliness. But her throat was parched. The only sound was a breath soft as wind. Thinking she was afraid, Tim smiled faintly and placed his hand on hers. That warm touch made her tremble, both painful and tender, like touching humanity's most distant memory. Outside, waves rose and fell. The sea was silent, but in its depths, undercurrents twisted, carrying the unfinished promise of a mermaid who had lost her voice to step into a world of love and trials. The first morning, sunlight poured through the window and spilled over the burlap-woven blanket as Helen woke amid the smell of old wood, cookfire smoke, and distant waves. Each breath carried a faint salt taste. Her body felt heavy, her legs like they were clamped between two boulders, throbbing with every shift. She looked down and saw the skin on her feet peeling away, the lingering gold glinting like sun-stuck sand. Every step was pain, but to her, it was proof she existed in his world. Tim's small house sat right by the swamp's edge, just a few footsteps from the water. The window faced the sea, where every morning the wind brought salt scent and the cries of gulls circling wide. Tim lived with his grandmother, a thin woman with silver hair but eyes still bright as kitchen fire. She was the keeper of ancient songs their ancestors carried across the ocean, songs once sung in the wave harmony ritual. When she saw Tim carry in a strange girl with golden shining skin, she stayed silent a long while. Then she pulled the blanket over her and said only, "Let the sea decide." From that day, Helen stayed in the house. She could not speak. Tim did not ask. Between them, every exchange happened through glances and small gestures. When he pointed to the sea, she nodded. When he brought back the first catch after heading out, she smiled. Grandmother watched the two, sometimes shaking her head, both pitying and afraid. She knew the sea never gave anything without taking it back sooner or later. Day after day, Helen learned to walk on her new legs. At first, every step drew blood, but she kept trying, both to please Tim and to honor the bargain she had made. Each time she stumbled, he caught her, patient as someone teaching a child its first steps. His eyes were gentle, holding a compassion he did not fully understand. The silent stranger with her hazy smile and deep-water eyes made his heart strangely calm. At night, when insects buzzed loud, Tim often brought out his bamboo flute to play on the porch. Helen sat close, listening, sometimes nodding faintly to the rhythm. No one spoke. But the silence between them was so full it felt tangible. The flute notes drifted out the window, slipped into the dark, mingled with the waves. Villagers passing by looked up and whispered that the sound was sad like the sea's dream. One afternoon, when Tim took her to the village market, people started staring. Some smiled kindly, others murmured things hard to catch. "Who's that golden girl?" Heard Tim pulled her from the storm. Could be good luck, could be trouble. Coastal villages believed anyone rising from the water carried a piece of the wave's soul. And a wave's soul, if not returned, kept the sea awake. Helen did not understand the whispers, but she felt their eyes curious, fearful. That evening, Grandmother kindled the charcoal fire, smoke rising thick. She sat on the porch, voice low and steady, telling Tim the story few mentioned anymore, the wave harmony ritual. Long ago, she said, when fish were plenty and the sea not yet angry, folks stopped their boats 1 week a year. They beat the old rhythms, sang thanks, but then they forgot, said no time for old ways, and from then on, the waves started taking back what they'd given. Tim sat still, listening to the wind twist around the roof. He knew she meant something deeper than words. Helen sat nearby, firelight turning her face amber. In that moment, grandmother looked at her long, then sighed softly. Child, the gold in your skin ain't from the sun. She bowed her head, unable to argue or explain. Inside, water rose heavy, tugging her back. But then Tim set a cup of tea before her, the scent of dried leaves and ginger warm. His hand brushed hers lightly, pulling her to the present. Time passed, and Helen slowly became part of the house. She learned to start the fire, fold nets, read the sky for wind. Tim never asked where she came from, only sometimes told of parents lost in a storm, of dreaming one day to marry someone true and live quiet by the sea. Each time, Helen only smiled, a sweet ache mixed with worry rising in her. She wanted to say she shared that dream, but her voice, her soul lay back in the deep. The closer they grew, the stranger the sea became. Night waves slammed the shore like someone calling names. Fish hid deep. Nets came up full of seaweed. Villagers whispered, "Someone's keeping the sea restless." Some mentioned the Golden Girl, others eyed Tim with suspicion. Grandmother said, "When old promises are forgotten, the sea comes to remind." Tim heard but only held Helen's hand tighter. He believed his love could not be wrong. That night, the sea boiled. Waves crashed against the house walls. Wind blew backward, ripping thatch loose. Helen woke, sat by the window, staring into black water. Among the wave columns, she saw her mother's shape crown glowing in the dark, gaze distant and stern. Water rose to the doorstep, whispering like a call. Helen clutched her chest. The pain of each step now spread everywhere. She knew the sea had never forgotten. And now, just as her love had taken root, the water's fury began to rise, waiting to reclaim what was taken. And now, dear viewers, pause for a moment to hit subscribe before we continue the main story, but only if you truly feel for what I'm sharing here, and drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. In the days after that strange wind, the sea changed its temper. The waves no longer green but turned silvery gray like dead fish eyes. Children throwing stones at the shore heard no echo. Fishermen's nets came up thick with black moss and shattered shells. Mornings, fog blanketed the water, heavy as incense smoke. Villagers looked at one another and whispered that the ocean was waking, demanding back what had been forgotten. Tim tried to stay calm, still heading out each dawn, still bringing fish home though scant. Helen stood on the porch, watching his figure shrink into the mist, her heart heavy as if an invisible hand pulled her toward the deep. From the ocean floor, the Mermaid Queen sensed the fracture in water's rhythm. Every current was a vein. Now they reversed, shoving against each other, carrying the aftertaste of rage. She knew why. Her daughter had left home, taking the song the soul water had given. Without that voice, the sea was like someone losing memory. Fury rose with sorrow. She sent glowing jellyfish to search, every wave layer ordered to scour the sandy coast. But when the jellyfish returned, they brought grim news. Helen had traded her voice for legs and was living among humans. From that moment, the water shifted, heavy as a storm's breath. On land, no one saw it, but everyone felt it. Night fell sooner, the moon vanished from the sky, and the sea began singing in a cold hiss. Tim's grandmother kept lamps burning all night, sitting by the door, mumbling ancient songs. "The sea is calling," she said. "It wants the old promise." Villagers gathered on the shore, discussing a Thanksgiving rite, but the young scoffed, saying, "Just work harder, cast nets farther." Only the elders remembered the wave harmony ritual, the rite abandoned for decades. Now they wanted to revive it for peace. Rumors spread fast. The village's richest seafood merchant, the one who bragged he could make fish, come ashore on command, stepped up to offer organizing the ritual. He said it needed spectacle, needed press, needed the world to see this village respected the sea. He believed in no rites, but new festivals meant promotion, more sales, fame. The village council, weary from the crisis, agreed. The date was set the next full moon, at the highest tide. Helen overheard it all through the window. She looked out at the sea, a vague fear rising in her. In her heart, a drumbeat echoed the rhythm of water, of memory reminding that the ritual could not be false. But she could not speak. Her song, the only language to warn humans, lay back in the dark trench. That night, she sat by the shore, the gold from her skin casting down into the water, as if calling someone to listen. And in the darkness, the sea whispered, "Have you forgotten, Helen? Have they forgotten?" Tim found her there, bare feet crusted with sand, tears mixing with seawater. He sat beside her, silent. In that quiet, Helen lightly touched his chest, where his heart beat strong. She needed no words. Somehow Tim understood she was afraid. He took her hand and said softly, "Don't worry, the ritual will make the sea happy." But as he spoke, a wave suddenly slammed the shore, icy as denial. In the following days, the sea rose high, pounding the breakwater like it wanted to swallow the village. Boats capsized, dead fish floated, and the air turned salt-chokingly thick. Villagers began eyeing Helen differently, mixed with curiosity, fear, and blame. "Since she came, the fish are gone," they said. "Maybe the sea's angry because of her." Those words cut into her like silent blades. Each night, while Tim slept, she went to the porch, staring at ink-black waves, wondering if her love was a sin. In the ocean, the queen began summoning wave armies. She stood amid the vortex, her crown blazing like golden fire in black water. "My child has forgotten who she is," she said, "and humans have forgotten their promise. If they do not remember, the sea will make them remember." As the words rang out, schools of fish swam in spirals, every current turning toward the shore. On the surface, no one knew that hundreds of miles below, the ocean was drawing breath, preparing to unleash its wrath. Helen felt it. Her sleep now grew heavy, full of strange visions, watery hands grabbing her ankles, houses swept away by waves, her mother's song echoing a call home. She woke in the night, body drenched in sweat, salt scent soaked into her skin. Tears fell, but no cry came. Only the waves answered, pounding harder each time she looked out the window. In the village, preparations for the ritual went on. Tim's grandmother sat in the shadows, stitching an old scarf, mumbling ancestor songs. She knew the sea's anger could not be soothed by empty words. Someone sincere must speak for the whole village, she thought. But who was pure enough? That merchant? Or Tim, her grandson with the bamboo flute and honest heart? She looked at Helen, the golden girl, slumped in silence, and understood both young ones were caught in a current bigger than themselves. The night before the ritual, wind blew without stop. Seawater rose to the doorstep. Helen stood on the porch, feet burning with pain, hair plastered to her cheeks. In the dark, she saw green flickers blinking offshore, the queen's jellyfish approaching. She knew tomorrow was not just a ceremony, but the sea's judgment. Dawn rose slowly, light dusting a layer of pale ash over the rooftops, the sandy shore, and the worried faces of the villagers. The day chosen for the wave harmony ritual had arrived. The whole village poured onto the beach, hands holding candles, some carrying drums, others dried fish, a few raising cloth flagpoles. The smell of incense mingled with salt, creating a strange scent both sacred and uneasy. Waves still beat in rhythm, but no longer soft. Each crash sounded like the heavy breath of someone suppressing rage. Tim and his grandmother went out early. He held his bamboo flute, walking slowly along the sandy path to the water's edge. Helen followed, barefoot, draped in white cloth, eyes fixed on the sea. She felt the wind shifting direction. Beneath her thin skin, the gold within her flickered like fireflies trapped in silk. Each time a wave touched the shore, she heard water's echo speaking in a language only sea children understood. They come again to forget the word. On the beach, the seafood merchant, the self-proclaimed chosen one, stepped forward before the villagers, wearing a new robe, a shiny white pearl necklace around his neck. He laughed loudly, speaking in an arrogant voice. "Today we thank the sea. Today we promise to live with the waves, to be friends with the water." Scattered applause, but a cold wind blew through, making everyone shiver. Tim stood quietly at the edge, the flute in his hand like a piece of memory that didn't belong to this noisy world. The ritual began with drums, the sound hollow, offbeat. The merchant shouted, blowing a shrill metal horn. The waves did not respond. The sky turned lead gray. He didn't notice, kept shouting, bowing clumsily to the sea, then telling the cameraman to record it. Tim's grandmother watched the scene, eyes filled with sorrow. "This ritual has no soul," she said softly. "The sea can't hear false sounds." Helen stood not far away, heart aching with each beat. Wind slapped her face, salty as tears. She wanted to scream, to stop it, but could not. In her throat, only silence heavy as stone. She turned to look at Tim. He still bowed his head, fingers gripping the flute tight. And then, as if hearing something from the earth's core, he stepped out onto the beach, slow but sure. The noise died down. The merchant frowned, but the villagers fell silent. Tim raised the flute, facing the sea. He breathed deep, then let the wind pass through the bamboo. The sound rang out, thin at first, then thickening, warm and familiar. It was the old melody, the one his grandmother sang when winds rose the ancestors' harmony song. The rhythm didn't beg, didn't show off, it told a story. Of hands rowing boats, of the first fish season, of salty sweat and souls returned to water. Villagers bowed their heads, grandmother burst into tears. The wind stopped for a moment, and the waves listened. Helen watched him, tears falling. The gold from her skin blazed, lighting the shallow water around the shore. She felt the rhythm touch her heart, pulling her between two worlds. But as the melody reached its final note, the sky suddenly darkened. A lightning bolt tore the heavens, striking far out at sea. The sound echoed, heavy and long like a scream. The flute fell from Tim's hand. Wind howled. Waves rose house-high, white and gigantic. Villagers screamed, scattering. Grandmother knelt, clutching her prayer beads. Helen stood still, white cloth wrapped around her, hair whipping wild. She knew this was no ordinary storm. It was her mother's rising. From the sea's heart, a glow erupted, brilliant and cold. Then, the colossal form of the Mermaid Queen appeared amid the pouring rain, her scales deep green, crown sparkling with gold and silver light. The sky seemed to bow. She looked to the shore, voice booming like 1,000 waves united. "Humans have forgotten. They dare call my ritual by lying tongues." Waves stood tall, water sweeping away paper altars, feeble oil lamps. The merchant was knocked down, yelling in the flood, but no one could save him in time. Tim rushed forward, grabbing Helen's hand, pulling her back. But water was already knee-deep. Wind blew so fierce, trees uprooted, villagers huddled in groups, calling names through thunder. Helen felt her mother's gaze, angry yet pained. She wanted to speak, to beg, but had no voice. She could only open her mouth, letting tears mix with rain, the gold from her skin reflecting on the water like a silent plea. In that moment, the sea paused just one beat. Waves rose no higher, wind no longer roared. The queen saw her daughter, recognized the royal blood's blazing gold now faded. Her rage softened. But the storm was awakened. It would not stop easily. "You have chosen," she said within the water, "and I must keep my word." A deafening crack. Waves surged in, water carrying away flags, drums, every trace of the false ritual. Tim held Helen, fighting the pull, but both were pushed back toward the hill path. At their feet, water swirled into vortices, like the ocean's mouth opening to reclaim what was its. In that instant, Helen knew escape was impossible. She turned, staring straight into the sea, gold in her eyes flaring like fire. A drop from the queen's crown fell, heavy as stone. Amid the chaos of wind, waves, and human cries, Tim heard a voice faint but clear ring in his heart. "If you are true, keep the promise to the sea." He didn't know if it was Helen or the ocean itself speaking, only that he had to act. He gripped her hand tighter, eyes fierce. But the waves had swept, the wind had called, and the storm stood tall, reaching the sky. Amid the howling wind, the storm swelled like the chest of a waking monster. The sun was swallowed, and the sea turned into a black mirror, reflecting jagged lightning like spears. Tim pulled Helen up to the high rocky outcrop, but the waves kept rising, coiling around their legs, cold as chains. She stood there, white cloth wrapped tight around her body, wet hair plastered to her cheeks, her skin emitting a faint golden glow flickering between thunderclaps. Beneath their feet, the ground shook, and then from the heart of the churning water, the Mermaid Queen rose. She did not emerge gradually, but blazed into existence amid the gale, like a mountain of water crowned. Her scales were deep green mixed with silver, the golden light reflecting from the trembling girl on the shore. Her eyes held the entire ocean deep, cold, and pained. She looked to the shore, her voice echoing through hundreds of wave layers, like 1,000 mothers speaking at once. You have made my daughter forget her own name. You have changed the sea's color. Thunder boomed, rain poured. Tim stood shielding Helen, feet planted in the sand, body shaking in the storm. He didn't fully understand the queen's words, but in his heart he felt the weight of loss. I don't know, he said softly, voice lost in the wind. I only love her. If I'm wrong, punish me, not the village. But the wind swallowed his words. Helen gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Her eyes glistened, no longer afraid. Only the gaze of someone who understood everything had a price. She stepped forward, legs trembling but resolute, seawater flooding her ankles, knees, then hips. Each step was an invisible cut, like hundreds of thin blades slicing through flesh. The gold beneath her skin glowed brighter, reflecting into the water, making the entire sea surface blaze like a dawn lost in the night. The queen saw her child, her voice deepening. My daughter, I have called you so many times. Why do you still stand among them, those who forgot to sing for the sea? Helen could not answer. She only bowed her head, rain mixing with tears. From her silent lips, no sound, but in her eyes, every word was clear. I haven't forgotten, Mother. I only wanted to understand, to be loved, as they love each other. The queen raised her hand, water rising into a pillar of light, wind swirling around the two. Love cannot save the sea. They only know how to take. Her voice thundered, but there was a broken beat at the end, like she was arguing with herself. Tim knelt, hands clutching sand, bowing before the water's goddess. He didn't know what bowing meant to the sea, but he knew the only way to say forgive was to lower himself. Helen pointed to her chest, then to her mother, then to Tim. 3 simple gestures, but filled with a plea. In the lightning flash, the queen saw a thin thread of light like golden silk connecting her daughter's heart to the human man. She recognized it was not human magic, nor sea spell. It was the light of promise woven from trust and loss. The wind eased for a beat. In that moment, sea and sky held their breath. But then, from afar, other gigantic waves kept rising. The sea had fully awakened, no longer obeying commands. The queen turned back, voice filled with fear. I can no longer stop it. The waves have remembered too long. Helen understood that her mother's anger, nurtured by centuries of forgetting, had now become the sea's own power. Tim gripped her hand. Rain poured down like memories. He said nothing, only let her see in his eyes honesty, fear, and compassion. Helen shook her head faintly, a weak smile blooming on her lips, the kind that softened the world for a second. She knew what she had to do. She released his hand, stepping one more pace toward the water. The wind gust whipped her hair upward, golden strands twisting into the gale like sun ribbons. The queen cried out, "Don't, my child! You don't understand the price of touching fire!" But Helen stepped deeper, water to her chest, to her neck. She closed her eyes, arms raised to the sky, letting rain fall on her skin. A pale blue light began to emanate from her heart. At first a small spot, then growing, spreading across her body. The water around her turned turquoise, light weaving into the waves, then dissolving into the wind. The storm faltered as if jolted from a trance. The queen stepped back slightly, fear clear in her eyes. She recognized the glowing was the remnant of the song, the soul fragment she had traded for legs. Somehow, Helen had reclaimed it, not with words, but with true love. But that light was also her life. As it intensified, her body gradually turned translucent. Tim shouted, lunging forward, but waves pushed him back, keeping him from touching her. Helen opened her eyes one last time, looking at him, then at her mother. Her smile blazed, casting flickering golden streaks across the water. The entire sea seemed covered in a layer of dawn. The queen shed tears. Her tears turned into pearls, drifting with the waves, falling around her daughter. My child, she whispered, you have chosen a path no creature dares you loved instead of living forever. The waves drew back, wind faded, rain softened into mist. Tim knelt on the shore, soaked, hands clutching earth. He watched Helen's light dissolve, merging into the water, flowing into long streaks like small golden streams blending with the sea. The queen bowed her head, voice trembling like retreating waves. Your love will become the bridge for a new promise. If humans keep the rhythm, the sea will keep the peace." Then she vanished into the mist, taking her crown of dim light and a mother's pain. When the storm retreated, only a flat, calm sea remained. Tim still knelt, unsure whether to cry or smile. Ahead, Helen's final light faded, but every time a wave lapped, the water still sparkled gold, as if she were still there, quietly breathing with the sea and the people. All right, my dear viewers, if you're watching and finding this story interesting, comment the number 1 or comment, "I'm still here to keep listening." The next dawn broke with fragile light, pale gold like a thread stretched across the sky. The sea no longer roared, but it was far from calm. The water lay unnaturally still, like a wounded beast panting after its rage. On the shore, houses leaned crooked, torn flags hung in tatters, sand thick over the paths into the village. No one died, but everyone trembled, knowing the sea had not forgiven. At the horizon, steam still rose in columns, reflecting that pale golden light like a soul just departed. It was the trace of the golden-scaled mermaid Helen and of the unfinished promise between humans and the ocean. Tim's grandmother sat on the porch, eyes cloudy yet bright, staring at the sea without blinking. "The sea ain't settled yet," she said softly. "It's just waitin' for our answer." Tim knelt beside her, clothes torn, hair wet, face gaunt. He hadn't slept all night. The wind still echoed in his head like funeral drums. He remembered Helen's smile in the storm, a smile both apologetic and blessing. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her translucent light dissolving into the water. And in that light, he heard a faint whisper, "If love is true, keep the promise to the sea." Grandmother stood, fingers running over prayer beads carved from ancient wood, voice low like singing. The old wave harmony ritual wasn't for luck. It was a vow to live right with the water. Folks forgot, so the sea remembers for 'em. Now you gotta do it again, Tim. Not with money, not with noise, but with breath. Tim looked up, dark eyes deep as whirlpools. He understood. You couldn't soothe the sea with fake rituals or empty prayers. Only true action made the waves listen. That afternoon, the villagers gathered on the shore. No altars, no banners, just pale blue sky and silent sea. Wind carried scents of seaweed, damp wood, and sweat. Grandmother placed the bamboo flute in Tim's hand, saying, "Play, child." But this time, not for the sea to hear, for the whole village to hear their own breath. Tim nodded. He stepped to the water's edge, where the sand still held Helen's footprints. His feet sank into soft mud, cold water wrapping his ankles like the ocean's old hands. He closed his eyes, breathed deep, and began to play. The melody had no words, only rhythm. Each note was a memory, the pull of nets, calls across noon heat, children laughing at full holds. The flute sound spread, touching waves, then hearts. An old man started clapping the beat, then another, then the whole village. Hollow drums, feet stomping sand, breaths uniting. No one sang, but everyone knew the words in their hearts. Keep the shore, keep the water, keep the word. When the drumming reached its end, grandmother signaled stop. All fell silent, a silence so long you could hear your own heartbeat. That silence was the ritual's holiest part, where humans left space for the sea to speak. No one talked, no one moved, only a breeze brushed by, light as a spirit's touch. In that moment, strange light spread across the water. The sea began to change color from murky gray to pale blue, then tinged with soft gold. Villagers looked at each other, eyes welling. They knelt, hands on sand, saying nothing. Tim bowed his head, still holding the flute. In the wind, he heard Helen's mother, low but kind. "This time, the sea will keep its word if you keep the rhythm." But at the far edge of the beach, one man didn't bow. The seafood merchant, the one who'd ruined the ritual, stood arms crossed, face tight. He watched the sea brighten, heart full of jealousy and fear. "Just coincidence," he muttered. "Ain't no magic here." Then, while everyone knelt, he quietly turned, climbed into his small boat. A light wind rose, the boat drifted. He wanted to go far, prove the sea had no power over him, but the flat water reflected nothing but his shadow. Tim opened his eyes, saw the boat drifting out, knew what was coming. He dashed into the water, yelling, but wind swallowed the sound. Waves began swirling around the boat, gentle at first, then stronger. Villagers shouted. Grandmother stood sharp. Don't break the silence. Whoever breaks the ritual, the sea takes. But Tim didn't hesitate. He threw the flute aside, plunged after the boat, water slapping his face, salty as blood. Helen, somewhere in the wind. He heard her, or was it the waves, whispering, "Save the man," then promised to keep the shore. He swam, hands bleeding on hidden rocks, until he grabbed the gunwale. The merchant stared wide-eyed, yelling, "The sea's pulling me down. Save me." Tim gripped his hand tight, trying to drag him to shallow water. Wind rose, water spun. Just as both neared exhaustion, from the depths came a low, deep sound, like someone sighing softly. Waves parted, gentle as opening a path. Villagers rushed in, pulling both to shore. The merchant coughed up water, sprawled on the sand, shaking. Tim slumped, chest heaving. The sea turned calm again. Golden light from the horizon spread wide, brilliant like thousands of Helen's fallen scales. Grandmother knelt, forehead to the ground. The sea has heard. Tim looked up. On the water, amid the dawn, he glimpsed a faint shape, dark hair flowing in the water, golden scales flickering like a distant smile. Helen. She stood on the sea's surface, silent, no longer flesh, just light shaped like a person. She nodded, as if agreeing. Then the figure dissolved, blending into the rising dawn. The villagers stayed silent a long while, no one daring to break the moment. Grandmother spoke, voice hoarse but steady. From today, we keep the ritual, not just with song, but with how we live. Everyone nodded. They hauled nets ashore, hung them up, vowing a week's rest from the sea. No one forced it, no one feared, just gratitude. Tim stood quiet, light on his face. Wind slipped through his fingers, carrying a sound like wordless song. "Thank you, Rhythm Keeper." He knew it was Helen, her final voice still living in the waves. From that ritual onward, the sea changed completely. The waves grew gentler, the water so clear you could see the bottom, where small fish circled as if singing. The sky seemed higher, and every morning began with the wind caressing the swamp's surface. The villagers called it the season of calm waves, a time when children could play on the sandy beach without fear of being swept away, and the elders sat by the shore sipping tea, listening to the waves lap in a steady heartbeat. Each time, they told one another, "The sea has forgiven, but it's thanks to love and a promise kept." Tim became the village's symbol, but he never claimed to be chosen. He still lived quietly in the house by the water, with his grandmother. The bamboo flute now hung by the door, untouched by anyone. Every evening, when the wind rose, it hummed faint notes on its own, like a distant call. People said it was Helen, the golden-scaled mermaid, playing the harmony song again with her voice that had dissolved into the water. On moonlit nights, the whole village held the new wave harmony ritual simple, no longer showy. They just lit lamps along the shore, one candle per household. Children danced, adults sang. They didn't sing to beg, but to remember. The songs told of ancestors braving storms, of women waiting for husbands, of children born amid the waves. In the singing, the sea seemed to nod, like an old mother listening to her child's tale. On nights when the wind carried a light salt scent, people believed Helen was passing by, smiling in the water's shadow. Time passed. Tim was no longer young. His shoulders broadened, skin sun-darkened, hair streaked with gray, but in his eyes still burned the warm light of someone who had witnessed a miracle. The villagers honored him as the Rhythm Keeper, the one who would play the flute each season, starting and ending the ritual. He never refused, though each time he played, his heart ached. For that melody was not just prayer, but a promise to Helen, a promise that their love would live on, not in bodies, but in sound. One evening, after many years, as the sun dipped halfway into the water, Tim went to the shore. The sky was calm, wind soft, waves lapping in slow rhythm. He carried the old bamboo flute, sat on the familiar rocky outcrop, the place where, long ago, he had first met the song. The sand had changed color, the rocks worn smooth, but the salt smell remained. He gently raised the flute, breathed deep, and let the wind pass through the bamboo. The flute sounded, not strong, but soft as an elder's breath. It retold the story of a distant time, of a girl with dazzling golden scales, of the storm and the promise, of the sea's sorrow and humanity's redemption. Each note drifted out, and the waves rose gently, like an old hand clasping his ankle. And then, amid the golden dusk, he saw something strange. The water far out brightened, reflecting a hazy gold like a silk ribbon. A shape appeared, not clear but enough to stop his heart. Helen. Her long black hair shimmered with gold like shattered sunlight. She said nothing, only looked at him. In those eyes, he saw peace, saw the sea smiling. Wind brushed by, carrying the familiar scent of coral and salt. He smiled, eyes welling. "I've kept the word," he whispered. "The sea still lives because of it." She nodded. The light around her faded gradually, merging into the water. But before vanishing, a soft breeze passed, carrying a very faint song, from far away, yet clear to anyone near the shore. "I haven't forgotten. I only sleep." As long as humans remember to give thanks, the sea will know how to smile. The villagers say that after that day, Tim no longer went out to sea. He aged in silence, still sitting on the porch listening to the flute hum in the wind. On his final night, when the full moon shone over the swamp, people saw him on the outcrop, back against the wind, flute to his lips. No one heard him fall, only the waves lapping 3 times, gentle, even, then still. The next morning, on the rock, the village found only the flute and a small shell glowing pale gold. From then on, each moon season, the sea hummed that melody, tender as a lullaby. The villagers believe it is Helen and Tim, now twin spirits of the water, one playing, one singing, keeping the sea mindful of those who keep their word. And grandmother, before closing her eyes, left this warning. If one day you forget, listen to the waves, for in every wave, a promise waits to be remembered. Many years passed, and that coastal village still stood firm through seasons of storms and sun, as if it had learned to breathe with the ocean. Children born there all heard the story of the golden-scaled mermaid and the sea's flute player, not as an ancient legend, but as real memory. They said that if you walked the beach at dawn, when mist still hung over the water, you would see a man's footprints and a small, glowing trail beside them, sparkling like moonlight pooled on the sand. The elders nodded and said, "That's Tim and Helen. They still walk the shore each morning to keep the sea smiling." Tim's grandmother had passed, buried right by the swamp's edge. On her grave, the villagers set a small stone, carved with a flute and wave lines, inscribed below, "The last rhythm keeper," the one who taught humans to thank the sea. From then on, each year at the fullest moon, the villagers gathered before her grave. No one recited prayers or held begging rites. They just listened silently to the waves, then played flutes together, clapping rhythms with their palms. They called it the nameless night, the night when no names were spoken, believing all souls that ever belonged to the sea returned to listen. And as the tales went, each time the music rose, the water began to glow. The first time, people no longer feared that golden light. They realized it wasn't a bad omen, but the light of memory, the light of those who dared to love, to repent, to keep their word. Children ran around, laughing loud, feet stepping on the glow like treading golden fish scales. Adults looked out to sea, and in every pair of eyes reflected Helen's long hair, graceful form, eyes deep as water. From the distant sea, a gentle wind rose. It wasn't fierce or cold, just carrying salt scent, and a single lonely note, thin as breath. Everyone paused, listening. It was Helen's song, no need for a voice, for now the sea itself was her voice. Each rippling wave hummed the wordless tune. "Love is a rhythm. If you keep it, I will keep it. Waves may retreat, but gratitude never runs dry." Tim was now a story, but people still felt him in the wind. On calm nights, the bamboo flute on grandmother's altar would vibrate softly, as if someone had just played it. Then the villagers knew the rhythm keeper was still watching over them, still sending Helen's message. Live like the sea, vast, patient, and forgiving. Each generation, the child chosen to play the flute first in the ritual had to learn one single line, etched deep in the heart. Keeping rhythm is keeping the word, not a promise to gods or the ocean, but to one's own soul. And so, over decades, even as wooden boats gave way to engines, the song still rang along the shore, slow and enduring as the planet's breath. One evening, a stranger visited the village, a young African filmmaker with a camera and questions. She heard the legend, then sat hours by the sea, saying nothing. At nightfall, she set the camera on the sand, closed her eyes, letting the wind carry wave sounds to her ears. When she opened them, she whispered, "I hear them. They're still telling the story." She filmed a short piece, just villagers playing flutes, waves lapping, and golden light reflecting on the water. When shown worldwide, people called it Song of Those Without Names. The world watched, tears falling without knowing why. Perhaps because in everyone there's a part of the sea, the part that knows love, forgetting, and keeping promises. At the film's end, one unexplained shot, in the dark, two small lights, one gold, one blue, wove together then vanished beneath the water. The villagers watched and just smiled. They knew it was Helen and Tim, returned to where they belonged. The sea still sang, the wind still blew, and under every wave, the whisper of those who once loved lingered. Keep the rhythm, for when humans forget, the sea will remember for them. And so the story of Helen the mermaid with dazzling golden scales and Tim, the boy who played music for the ocean, comes to a close, but it never truly ends. For in every wave lapping tonight, you might still hear that song, gentle yet enduring, reminding us that true love never dies. It only changes form into wind, into water, into memory to heal hearts that know how to believe. If you're listening to this story in the middle of the night, pause for a moment, breathe deep, and listen to the sea around you wherever you are. The sea may not be right beside you, but Helen's music and love are still flowing through the water in every raindrop, every breath. And now, my dear viewers, if your heart has been touched, share this story with loved ones, with those you believe have sacrificed something for love. Leave a comment below to let us know where you're listening from and what time it is so we know how far the waves of this story have reached across the world. Hit subscribe to the channel, because there are many more legends like this, old songs carrying African souls, where humans and nature don't clash but remember together. Listen to the waves, because the sea has never forgotten.